Hello everyone, welcome to the Friday Night Live. I'm 2 minutes late today, sorry about that. I'll get straight on with the questions. Oh dear, where are we? Right. Hi William, could you please talk about the importance of mental prep work before physically stopping the poison, please? I see so many posts from folks who go in blind, all guns blazing, and trying to stop cold turkey and white knuckling it without knowing what they're letting themselves in for, often asking basic questions why their body is reacting the way it is when they first stop: poor sleep, high anxiety, etc., first few days symptoms, and not having any knowledge in their sobriety toolbox. If folks read, watched, listened a bit more before physically stopping, there may be not so many relapse or struggling folk. Mindset is everything, so ideas and the importance of not just reading your own material but others' authors as well may help. Thanks. So I suppose this is a very good point because the usual dynamic is when we stop drinking, there's parts of it we hate, but the reason it's difficult to stop is there's lots of it we still like. So, you wake up in the morning, you feel awful, you're absolutely sick to the back teeth of it, and you think, I'm never going to drink again. But then the evening comes and you think, oh, but it would be really nice to have a drink, or you think about going out with friends, or you think about going on holiday or Christmas and think, how can I possibly do those without drinking? So it's that constant tension. And the problem, you see, this is one of the problems. A lot of people, when they try and stop drinking or smoking or anything, they make a list of all the reasons they want to stop. That's pointless, because the thing that keeps dragging you back isn't the reasons you want to stop, it's the reasons you want to continue. A better way of going about it is actually make a list of all the reasons you want to continue doing it. And then, for me anyway, what opened the door to being able to quit was realizing how all of them are completely false. So that is about understanding and exploding those myths before you get in there. The problem is the dynamic. If you don't change the dynamic, people who are constantly going through day one, they need to change the dynamic, because if you're doing the same thing, if you do something and it fails and you do it again exactly the same, you can expect to fail again. So you need to do something to change it. And as I say, how you normally, or how for a lot of people it works, is they start attacking the reasons they want to drink. Well, I can't imagine ever going on holiday without a drink. Well, you need to then delve into it. And for me, it was delving into the science and the psychology and the physiology and the chemistry to understand how that's completely not the case at all. The other thing, of course, is that poor sleep, high anxiety in the first few days. It must be horrendous not understanding that how is that is caused by the alcohol. Because I think a lot of people must quit and feel awful like that, and kind of think, well, this is life without alcohol, it's going to go on forever. Of course it doesn't, it goes very quickly. But actually understanding it all is really important, and I think also very important, because you then start to understand how most of the pleasure in drinking is relieving that high anxiety that's been caused by alcohol in the first place. Um, and as I say, mindset is and it's key. I think the last part of this question, not just reading your own material, but other authors as well. So there's two ways you can stop drinking. You can just grit your teeth and white knuckle it and just resist temptation for the rest of your life. Or you can change your mindset. So change alcohol from something that you want into something that you don't want. Okay. And some people find Alcohol Explained is very good at that. But there's lots and lots and lots of other authors and other methods out there, but they're all working towards that same thing, trying to make you enjoy sobriety and not want to go back to drinking. So if my stuff doesn't work, then keep looking and find someone else's whose does. I've just been listening to you on this Naked Mind podcast with Annie Grace, and I wondered if you could talk a bit more about the no such thing as an alcoholic, meaning that we can all become dependent on alcohol over time. I refuse to believe that I have a disease called alcoholism and am somehow wired differently to everyone else. I just think over the years my brain has become more tolerant and producing more stimulants to counter the poison. Do I have a chemical imbalance? Basically, I'm asking why me and not the 80% of the population who don't have an issue with alcohol. I hope this makes sense. Thank you. So to go through the physiology of it, alcohol is a sedative. It's a chemical depressant, by which I mean it's something that decreases or inhibits nerve activity. but your brain works by way of something called homeostasis, which is a delicate chemical balance. So your brain creates and excretes its own drugs, hormones, and chemicals. Um, and it does so to keep this delicate chemical balance going. Now, when you take a sedative like alcohol, you interrupt that chemical balance. So your brain tries to counter it. And it does it in lots of ways, but essentially what it amounts to is it becomes oversensitive. It releases things like cortisol and adrenaline. When they do tests on those who are chronically alcohol dependent, they have very high cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone. Your body's basically pumping that into you to counter the sedating effects of the alcohol. So when the alcohol wears off, you're left like really anxious and nervous. Okay, and over the years, you start to associate any kind of stress with that unpleasant feeling, and you instinctively, I call it instinctively, but it's actually a learned subconscious reaction to take alcohol to relieve that feeling. And that can happen to anyone who drinks enough alcohol. The question, why me and not the 80% of the population who don't have an issue with alcohol, there's a few points there. Firstly, don't have an issue with alcohol. I mean, what does that actually mean? Are we talking about someone who is alcohol dependent? And if so, I would say it's just a matter of degrees, because I know an awful lot of people who don't enjoy social occasions without alcohol. They'd rather not go to a social occasion if they can't have alcohol. Now, to me, that means you're dependent on alcohol. You may not be physically dependent on it all day, every day, but if there's an aspect, a part of your life that you can't cope with or enjoy without a drug, to a degree, you are dependent on that drug. If you cannot enjoy social occasions without alcohol, then you're dependent on alcohol for those social occasions. And as I say, that might not be physical dependency, but it's certainly a psychological dependency. And don't forget, every single person who doesn't enjoy social occasions without a drink, or doesn't enjoy holidays without a drink, they used to do, didn't they, before they started drinking alcohol? When they were children, they went on holiday and had a great time, and they went to parties and had a fantastic time. It's only when we introduce alcohol that we start to lose the ability to enjoy life without it. So firstly, I would question whether this sort of 80% of the population who don't have an issue with it don't have an issue with it at all. I mean, in my experience, the vast majority of people have some kind of dependency on it. It's just a matter of degrees. But let's go back to a far more basic kind of physiological and psychological element of addiction. When you have an alcoholic drink, your brain reacts to it by becoming overly sensitive. And when the alcohol wears off, that oversensitization remains for a period. It's not particularly nice feeling. It's a feeling of like anxiety. But what it really amounts to is you feel less able to cope with life. You just feel less mentally resilient. And when you have another drink, you redress that balance and you feel much, much better. Okay, so anyone who's ever had an alcoholic drink, their brain has gone through that process. Now, when you first start, your brain's never encountered alcohol before, so it's not much it can do. It becomes more and more proficient over time at countering the sedating effects of the alcohol. So early on, it's not very good at it. Which is why people can't drink so much alcohol in their early drinking years. They develop a tolerance as time goes by. So if you think that overstimulation phase is what I call alcohol withdrawal, and a lot of people kind of react to that, and you say, were you saying anyone who's ever had a drink has alcohol withdrawal? If you consider that withdrawal is an unpleasant feeling caused by a chemical imbalance that is of itself caused by the previous dose of the drug wearing off, then absolutely that is alcohol withdrawal. Okay, so alcohol withdrawal is experienced by anyone who's ever had an alcoholic drink. Alcohol withdrawal doesn't mean you're dependent on alcohol. There's severities of it. Obviously, people who are drinking 3 bottles of spirits a day have a very different extreme withdrawal to the person who's having their first few sips of beer. But the addiction comes in is not whether the withdrawal is there. It's partly how severe the withdrawal is, but much more important to that is how your brain interprets that withdrawal. The person who has never drunk alcohol before in their life and has a couple of beers has the withdrawal when it wears off, but to them, their brain doesn't know what to do with it. It's just an unpleasant feeling that's sat there, and it doesn't really mean anything. But over time, as you drink more and more and more, your brain starts to learn that there's a way of getting rid of that withdrawal, and it's to take another drink. So over the years, with repeated drinking, your brain starts to form the message, or starts to form the opinion, or basically it starts to learn that when an alcoholic drink wears off, it leaves an unpleasant feeling, and another alcoholic drink will relieve that feeling. That is learned behavior. It takes years, sometimes even decades, for the brain to learn that. And it also requires a certain drinking pattern. If you only ever have one drink once a week and then never have another for the whole week, your brain will never learn that. So you will never become addicted to it. If you just have one or two drinks when you go out with friends once a month, again, you will probably never learn that. So it takes a certain type of drinking pattern. But when you learn that, every time an alcoholic drink wears off, it creates the desire for the next one, because as that feeling kicks in, your brain interprets that as, I want another drink. It's learned behavior. Okay, you're not born with that. It is learned. But when it's learned, it cannot be unlearned. Okay, so you can never backtrack. That's why people who have alcohol problems can never cut back or moderate. Some people lead you to believe they can, but they can't, not easily. It's never a comfortable relationship. So that's why you are not the 80% of the population. The thing to bear in mind is that every drug has its take it or leave it phase. Okay, here's an interesting thing. The vast majority of people who smoke, when they first take that very first experimental puff on a cigarette, it makes them cough. Okay, actually, the same, interestingly enough, is true with vaping as well. Most people, when they vape for the first time, it makes them cough. Now, let's just stop there and look at what's happening. Your body has got some built-in mechanisms to protect you. Vomiting is one. If you take a poison, you vomit. The reason you vomit is your body is expelling the poison, getting it out of your system so it can't hurt you. Coughing is a similar thing. If you breathe in smoke, okay, smoke is bad for you, so your body's natural reaction is to cough. A cough is just forcibly exhaling what is in your lungs. Okay, so when you first smoke a cigarette or take a puff of vape, the body's reaction is, this is poison, and it makes you cough. But it's what happens directly after that that is interesting, because even if you cough, some of that smoke goes into your body, and some of that contains nicotine, and some of that nicotine goes into your bloodstream. Okay, so immediately after inhaling the smoke, you cough, but nicotine is a stimulant and it hits your bloodstream, and you suddenly feel a lot more alert and awake. Okay, so the brain immediately starts to reinterpret things, because what it does, we're great adapters, human beings. We have to be to survive. In fact, all life is a great adapter. But what it's doing is it's reinterpreting something. It's saying, I breathe the smoke in and my immediate reaction is it's a poison, but actually it seemed to do me a lot of good because I felt a lot more alert afterwards. So, and then you take another puff and it's reinforcing that. So your body actually changes its defense mechanism. It stops you coughing when you inhale vape or nicotine because of the drug. Now, let me be absolutely clear here. Nicotine is not good for you. Your body just interprets it as a good thing. Drugs confuse the body. They make us feel a certain way, not because they're good for us, but because they confuse our nervous system. Okay, so in that way, we reinterpret that experience. And that's essentially what happens with alcohol. Over the years, you become to want it more and more and more. But the point here is that any addiction is learned behavior. And until you learn instinctively that you need another dose to relieve the withdrawal caused by the previous dose, you can take it or leave it. But once you learn that, you can never unlearn it. So that's the key. Every drug has a take it or leave it phase. Getting through that take it or leave it phase is learning instinctively, or certainly subconsciously, that another dose of the drug will get rid of the unpleasant feeling that kicks in when the previous dose wears off. And when you learn that, you can never unlearn it. So that take it or leave it phase is once and once only. I would love a conversation on this too, as I do not agree with the disease model of alcoholism, and that's why I won't go to AA. I don't want to stay in a broken state saying I'm Julie, I'm an alcoholic for the rest of my life. However, I do seem to get addicted or overdo everything: ice cream, coffee, even exercise. Would love more on this topic. So there's a few points to make here. I mean, I've talked a bit about this anyway, but there are genuine pleasures in life, okay? And genuine pleasures, you want to keep doing them. Okay, so I quite enjoy exercise. I query whether you can overdo it unless you're picking up loads of injuries or something. I don't think there's anything particularly bad about it. So don't start confusing repeated behavior for beneficial reasons, i.e., things you keep doing because they are genuinely good and you want to keep doing them, um, with addiction. Okay, so I like reading and I spend a lot of time reading. I wouldn't say I was addicted to reading, because addicted to me kind of suggests negative connotations. You know, there's a downside to it. I don't see any downside with reading. Um, so do keep clear in your mind that there's a difference between addiction and doing things that you enjoy as much as you can do. Okay, but okay, so things like ice cream, coffee. Um, for me, that's not a um, it's certainly not a genetic thing, and it's not even a personality thing. For me, that's kind of a coping mechanism thing, because what a lot of people tend to do, particularly in the West, is we tend to try and consume things to change how we feel when we're not feeling good, be that, you know, nicotine, caffeine, alcohol, or sugar. So we have a bad day, or we're pissed off, or whatever it might be, so we reach for the ice cream or the coffee or whatever. So for me, that's a simple coping mechanism point. And the thing to do is to switch that to something more healthy, like reading, putting a film on, exercise. And again, exercise, I don't see that as being a bad thing anyway. Talking to friends, whatever, rather than trying to consume something to change how you feel. I don't see that as either a personality issue or as certainly not genetic. It's just a learnt mechanism to cope with stresses and strains of everyday life. Um, the neuroscience around all this is fascinating. I'd love to learn more. I wondered, when reading Alcohol Explained and trying to get a handle on ambition, if Kevin McCawley's pleasure unwoven dopamine and prediction error theory could be applied. So I have to confess, I don't know what that is. I did have a quick look online, and I found a couple of videos on it on YouTube, but they were like an hour. So I'm really sorry. I don't know what that is. I will try and get around to having a look into it, but I can't really answer that question. I'm 1 week shy of my 1 year soberversary, so well done. It would take a book length to express my gratitude and gratefulness to William Porter and this group, so I just say thanks for now. Would you please like to share a few bits about how to proceed, if there is anything in particular to be concerned about? I do not feel sober or dry, just reconnected to normality after years of being gaslit into how to relax, have fun, and be sophisticated. Thank you. So well done. And also, I think that sums it up beautifully about the question I was talking about earlier about mindset. And that's what it is: being gaslit, being conned. Basically, that's what it means. I only came across this word recently and I didn't understand it. So it means being conned. Um, so that's what it's, we're being conned into say that you need alcohol to relax, to have fun, to be sophisticated, where you don't. And as I say, learning why and how that is false, and actually really believing it, is key for me to quitting, and I think key for a lot of other people quitting successfully, because when you see through that myth, you just have no more interest in drinking. So I would say absolutely not anything to be concerned about or to worry about. You've done it perfectly. You've cut out alcohol and you're just getting on with the rest of your life. So that's the absolute ideal way of doing it. Always be wary, because I've said this many times, but alcohol, over and above any other drug, is the one we're bombarded with most these days. It used to be smoking as well, but now it's by far the most with alcohol, about how it's relaxing, how it's fun. You know, you've got friends posting their drinks on social media. Every time you turn the TV on, there's people drinking. It's in songs, books, everywhere. So you're constantly being bombarded with the false image of alcohol, and you need to be on your guard, because if you just don't worry too much about it, it will eventually wear down the foundations of your sobriety. So you need to be on your guard about it. But other than that, no, I would say just enjoy your life. I wish I could attend a live, but I'm working at that time. Please do one on the weekend. Oh yeah, so the topic I'm most interested in is how to obtain that deep mindset change you call spontaneous sobriety. This is my second time alcohol free, the first one being a 10-month stint. I wish I could get to the place where I truly don't want to drink. So again, that goes back to what I was talking about, mindset. But so don't forget, I've kind of almost described like the holy grail. I don't want to drink and I never want to drink ever again, and that's where you want to get to. Okay, but don't forget, up until about 10 years ago, all that was really out there for quitting alcohol was AA, and AA wasn't really about changing your mindset. It was just about resisting that next drink, taking one day at a time and just not drinking for that one day. And that was all that it was. And even then, people did stop drinking and went on to live happy, fulfilling lives. Okay, this is hopefully a better way of doing it by changing your mindset so you really don't want to drink. And your ideal should be to never ever desire an alcoholic drink again. But bear in mind, we do live in the real world. And I think it unlikely that nobody is ever going to slip up, particularly because of what I was just talking about. We're constantly bombarded with these nonsensical images, to just have a moment where you think, oh, this would be nice, or that, beer would be nice, or whatever. So what I would say is, the most important thing is not to drink. Mindset is something, it's almost like an ideal, something you're constantly striving for. If you are lucky enough, and some people genuinely do get there, to be one of the people who never want to drink again, they have no interest in it, it just holds zero appeal for them, then that's fantastic. But if you're not there and you manage to be there for 70, 80, 90% of the time, that's still great. Don't worry. Don't let it trip you up. Because I see people that do that. They kind of, because they're not 100% there, they kind of doubt the whole thing, and it almost brings the whole thing crashing down. If you're not 100% there, treat it like an ideal, keep striving towards it. But the most important thing is not to drink, because even people who, take each day at a time and have to work at their sobriety all the time, they're still better off doing that than drinking. Let's be perfectly honest about this. So there's lots of different ways of stopping. What's right for one person might not be right for the other, and we all chose our own way. But whatever method you use, you're better off not drinking than drinking. Okay, so as I say, make that your ideal and strive towards it. But if you do have those thoughts, it's perfectly natural, and just keep working on them. And as I say, it's better to want to drink and be miserable because you can't have one, but not have one, than to give in and have one, because then you'll be even more miserable. So I've been working my way through Never Enough. So I've been working my way through Never Enough: The Neuroscience and Experience of it's the name of a book, of Addiction, by Judith Grisel. I'm not sure how I feel about all of it, but like anything in science, there's so many varied views. But she did talk some about studies done where the children of alcoholic parents, higher with 2, having a noticeably lower level of beta endorphins than the control individuals, beta endorphin being released while drinking. They believe this can outline the higher likelihood of becoming addicted. I'd be interested in your thoughts around the subjects. So this is going back to like the genetics and trying to explain addiction with recourse to genetics. Okay, so this is something that came about a few years ago and has pretty much fallen out of favor. But let me be absolutely clear on it. Different people react to alcohol in slightly different ways. So let me caveat that. Let me start at the beginning. Alcohol is a sedative the world over. There's no way it's anything but a sedative. Okay. And every human being on the planet reacts to it by their brain trying to become ultra sensitive to counteract the sedating effects of the alcohol. That happens to everybody. Okay. And the more they do that, the more they drink, the more proficient their brain gets to doing that, at going through that process, the more they can drink, and the worse the withdrawal. Okay, the worse the withdrawal, the more likely their subconscious is going to pick up on the fact that when the alcohol wears off, there's an unpleasant feeling that needs another drink to get rid of it, and therein lies the addiction. Okay, that is true for everybody. Having said that, if you drill down into molecular level, there will be slight differences. So there are differences between races. Some races can drink more alcohol than others. Okay, uh, the Asians, they don't metabolize alcohol quite as well as we do in the West. Okay, so there are differences. Okay, but that's not to say that people in Japan aren't alcoholic, because clearly they are. And that's not to say that everyone in London and New York is alcoholic, because clearly not everyone is. Okay, there are slight differences. So somebody sat in, someone of purely white stock in New York drinking may need to drink slightly fewer drinks over a decade than someone out as a Japanese person. They might need to drink slightly more. So there are these marginal differences, but the basic mechanism is the same. Drink enough and you will get addicted. Okay, it's the same with what used to be a big thing a few years ago was mental health, because there's a big correlation between people with alcohol dependency and mental health issues. That's kind of been overtaken now by the trauma, and it's people with childhood trauma, and there's that correlation. So let me explain that as well. If you take a group of heavy drink, say alcohol dependent people, and a section of the population who don't have alcohol dependency, you may well find that in the alcohol dependent category, you've got a higher level of mental health issues, you've got a higher level of childhood trauma, and there will be genetic differences as well. Okay, but that's not to say it's a complete answer, because it never is. So if someone has got a mental health issue or childhood trauma or whatever it might be, a sedative will take the edge off it. Okay, most of the time, mental health issues, whatever they are, you don't feel right, you don't feel good. The quickest way to get rid of that is to anaesthetize it. And what's the easiest, most accessible sedative out there at the moment? It's alcohol. So of course, if you take a population of people who are alcohol dependent, you may find a higher number of percentage of people there with childhood trauma or mental health issues or whatever it is. But that's never the whole story, because there's always people in there who don't have that, who have just drunk regularly and heavily for many years, and that's how they become alcohol dependent. Why have they drunk out heavily and regularly for many years? Well, it's just what we do. You can be brought up to drink a lot. I was speaking to someone the other day. I work in insurance in the City of London, and when he was younger, he started out in the city. He said he was drinking 100 drinks a week, doing deal. It was his job. They went to the pub and they stayed there all afternoon, and it was all on the company credit card, but it's what you did. If you didn't drink, you didn't do the deals, because you weren't in the pubs with people to do it. So that that was someone who, that was part of his lifestyle. It was just what was expected of you. It's insane. But that's the thing with it. So yes, you will always be able to dig in, and no doubt they will just discover there's this gene amongst the alcohol dependent people, and that it's much more prevalent. It might be a gene that means you're better at metabolizing alcohol. Because don't forget, how you deal with alcohol is actually how your brain can counteract a poison and keep you alive while you're taking it. It's generally a good thing, but the better you are at that, the more likely you are to become addicted. It's never the whole story. 79 days alcohol free, feeling healthy and comfortable, but now getting worried about my heavy cravings and steep intake of alcohol free drinks. At the same time, I despise alcohol and plan never to go back there. Any advice with my excessive love of alcohol free drinks? Anyone experiencing the same? So I would say, in fact, there's another one here as well, which I'll read out as well, because it's a sort of the same question. I was getting a bit carried away with the alcohol-free beer, was on beach holiday last week and was drinking them at 9 a.m. on the beach. I just thought to myself, well, that's why you are drinking alcohol-free now with that behaviour. Even at home at weekends, I think it's too early to open one now, normally about 10 a.m. The odd behaviour comes out with me. I'm on day 53 or 54 this last streak. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying about before, which is doing things that are genuinely enjoyable. When you're thirsty, having a cold drink is genuinely enjoyable. So if you're on holiday and you're hot and you're drinking a lot, not alcoholic, soft drinks, then that's going to be enjoyable. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. What I would say is it kind of depends why you're doing it, because if you're kind of trying to somehow get that same feeling that you get from alcohol-free beers, then I would say it's not the alcohol-free beer that's the problem. There's something probably wrong somewhere in your sobriety, because you're still trying to get that feeling, which you need to sort of get away from. But I would say don't worry too much. I mean, just look at it as you're drinking a soft drink. You know, if you wake up in the morning, you might have a tea or coffee, or if you don't drink caffeine, you might have a glass of water. Well, if you don't drink either of those, you might have a fruit juice or an alcohol-free beer. The issue with drinking it in the morning is non-existent, isn't it? Because the problem isn't like the hops or the fizzy water, it's the alcohol. In beer, there's hops, fizzy water, and alcohol. The fizzy water and the alcohol, the hops isn't the problem, it's the alcohol, particularly first thing in the morning, because it kind of suggests you've got a serious problem. So if you're having it without the alcohol, I wouldn't worry too much. You know, if you're thirsty and you're enjoying having a cold drink, I would say crack on and enjoy yourself. As ever, just be wary that, I'm not sure how many calories there are, but if you're drinking like 9 or 10 of them in a day, there's going to be an awful lot of calories in there, which is probably not ideal. And also do be wary, because we're talking now about alcohol-free drinks, but of course a lot of these beers aren't alcohol-free. In the UK, I think it has to be alcohol-free. UK and Europe, it's 0.05%. So 0.05% of alcohol, but in the US it's 0.5, which is 0.5%. So I would say be careful about that, because if you're having like 10 drinks that are 0.5, that's the equivalent of having a 5% beer. So do watch that aspect of it as well. Why do I keep going on a 3-4 day bender, then go sober for a while? People think I'm controlling it. I'm not. Well, that's exactly what I used to do. I was never a daily drinker. I would Thursday or Friday start drinking, and I would drink an awful lot, and then I'd wake up on Saturday and just start drinking again, and pretty much do the same on Sunday. And then I would either go into work feeling like rubbish on Monday, or ring in sick and carry on drinking on Monday. And that's basically what alcohol does, because when you wake up feeling rubbish from drinking, the quickest way to feel normal again is to have another drink. Go back to our physiology. You know, the reason you feel awful is because of that disruption to your brain's chemistry. And the quickest way to address that balance is to drink a load more alcohol, because your brain is set up to act best under the sedating effects of the alcohol. The alcohol's gone, so your brain's rushing ahead, going nuts, making you feel really anxious and weird. Quickest way to correct that balance is to have another drink. And then what normally happens is, if you're a regular a binge drinker like me, you do get to the point where you just feel absolutely awful. You do need to go to work. You do need to get back engaged at life. So you go through a day or two of feeling awful in the withdrawal stage before you go back to it. And that's the cycle I was on. It absolutely ludicrous looking back on it, completely pointless. A lot of people say, well, then why do you go back into it? But again, that's just the psychology of it. We are taught that Friday night comes and you deserve a drink, and Friday night comes and you start to obsess about it, even though you don't have the physical withdrawal there. You don't need a physical withdrawal to crave something. You just need to want it very badly and not be able to think about or enjoy anything else until you have it. That's what a craving is. And that was the exact cycle I was going on. So it's completely understandable. It's a mix of factors. It's just that belief, that craving. And then when you're actually on the alcohol, it's that withdrawal and that wanting to keep away that horrible feeling. And that's it. You're no different really than the daily drinker, other than your stop, start like I was doing, where the daily drinker is just like it's a continuous cycle. Answer is exactly the same. Change your mindset. Start to understand how Friday nights are so much better when you're not drinking. Sleep well, wake up feeling better on a Saturday. Whole weekend's more enjoyable, and then you don't feel rubbish half the next week. This next question is a good one. Parenting needs to be addressed if it hasn't already. How to get through the first few weeks or even months. I struggled with this bad and honestly was not the best mum for those first couple of weeks, especially around 4 p.m. when I'd usually have a glass of wine. Being told by other mum friends we deserve a drink after being mum all day. The glorification of mum's drink or mummy time is very hard to combat. Right, so I cannot imagine. So we've talked about how alcohol affects you physiologically. Okay, it makes you feel that extra bit anxious. What it also does, of course, is ruin your sleep, because sleep is not about just lying down and going unconscious for a few hours. When you sleep properly, you go through different sleep cycles. And one of the main differentiating factors between those sleep cycles is how deeply unconscious you are. So there's something called deep sleep, where, as the name suggests, you're very deeply asleep. But then there's something called REM sleep. Now, REM sleep's where you dream. We don't know much about it, but it's crucial. And when they've attached sensors to people and monitored them in REM sleep, their brain lights up almost as if they're fully awake. When you don't drink, you usually go through 6 or 7 cycles of REM sleep. When you drink, you go through on average 2. Okay, you lose out all your REM sleep or most of it. And that's because when you're in the first part of the night, you're too heavily sedated for your brain to get you into that REM sleep, because you have to be almost fully conscious. And then when the alcohol fully wears off, you can't sleep at all. That's why you wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning when you've been drinking and can't get back to sleep and lie there anxious and tired but unable to sleep. It's the alcohol withdrawal. It's the equivalent of drinking loads and loads of caffeine. You know, when you have too much caffeine, you feel really anxious and horrible. So even 1 or 2 drinks interrupts your natural sleeping pattern. So when you're drinking, you are always tired and always slightly more anxious and short-tempered than you would otherwise be. How on earth does that make you a good parent? I mean, honestly, the 2 things you need more than anything else in the entire world to be a good parent, you need to have energy and you need to have patience. Alcohol robs you of both of those. I come at this from completely the other way. I genuinely cannot understand how people can have young children and drink at the same time. It must be horrible. And I can't imagine you enjoying a moment of it. I struggle quite a bit and have done always with parenthood. I found it quite hard work. Okay. I do enjoy it most of the time, just about. Okay. But if I had had a couple of beers the night before and was feeling kind of a bit out of sorts and a bit tired, I would hate it. And I genuinely just, it astounds me that I remember watching something on TV, and they were talking about drinking and parenthood. And someone said, "Why shouldn't I have a few drinks? I'm a good parent." And I thought, what a stupid thing to say. Who is a good parent? Okay, that's my first point. People are, we're not good parents or bad parents. We just do the best we can. Okay, some people might be very good parents, some people might be awful parents, but you don't judge yourself by whether you're good or bad at it. You judge yourself by how hard you're trying about it, how hard you're trying with it, how much effort you're putting in. Most importantly, are you doing the best you can? Okay, if you're drinking, the answer is no, you are not. You may be the best parent in the world, but if you're drinking, you're going to be less patient and more tired than you would be if you weren't drinking. And this other thing, we deserve a drink after being mum all day. What's deserving about having a drink? We deserve to have our lives ruined by being mum all day. We deserve to feel tired and irritated and lethargic and not enjoy being a parent or at all because we're too tired and out of sorts to enjoy it anyway. That's our reward for being a parent. It's absolutely ludicrous. And again, this sounds like a mindset thing to change. Deserving to have a drink. No one deserves to be miserable. And how is being miserable a reward? 1 year for me today, William, thanks to your book. How a year, that's fantastic. I love a year because a lot of the time people often count days, or should I count days? Should I not count days? And there's kind of like arbitrary things. I've been a month, I've been 2 months, and it's all fantastic. Anytime you can get under your belt is fantastic. A year, I think, is brilliant for the simple reason that when you've done a year, you've done birthday, Christmas, holiday, you've done it all. You've done the big things. So it's absolutely fantastic. However, I have to complete 2 weeks in managed isolation next week. So any tips for that would be great. So, I mean, I've been stuck in isolation a few times. My wife and my eldest son had COVID and they had it sort of back to back. So I spent like 3 weeks at home, not being able to leave the house at all. I haven't really got any tips other than what kept me going, which was just, finding some quiet time and reading when you can. and that's it. What you don't want to do, obviously, is ruin it even more by feeling awful. So obviously, don't drink. But as I say, what I did was, I mean, I kind of struggled with it worse because I like having time on my own. And I was suddenly stuck in a, pokey little 3-bedroom house with 4 other people who I could not escape from for a moment. But yeah, for me, it was just finding those isolated moments here or there to read and just get some time on your own. But whatever you need to get through it. I mean, if you're someone like me who likes to exercise, that's a struggle, but just take it as a chance to sit back and do some quiet things at home, like reading or some DIY around the house or whatever. This last question actually was left over from last week, so I'll go through it quickly. I know you talk quite openly in the book about your own previous alcohol dependence, but what actually inspired you to write the book in the first place? It's one thing to give up the booze, but to take on the task of writing a book about it means you must have felt very strongly about it. I don't think you've ever really talked about what motivated you to write the book. Apologies if you already have, but I must have missed it. Thanks. So I started it and gave it up because I just couldn't be bothered with it. It is a massive job writing a book. Sounds like a good idea, and when you sit down to do it, you realize what a massive task it is. So I did start it and then put it to one side for a long time, until I picked it up again. And then I kind of got quite into it and enjoyed writing it. I think there was a few things. It's always hard to sort of judge with the benefit of hindsight, but I think partly for me it was so many people out there not seeing alcohol for what it was. It was like almost like a con man charging around conning everyone, and you want to expose them. I kind of in a way felt like Hercule Poirot, when he goes into a room and he sees like an ornament out of sort of slightly off kilter and he has to straighten it. I kind of feel like that sometimes, like I have to set the record straight with things. I'm not a very confrontational person, but I can't let things go if somebody's saying something that's wrong, which is why, even though I'm not confrontational, I get on quite well in my job, because I can't sit there and listen to people saying things that are incorrect. I have to say, sorry, no. So I'm kind of good advocating for people. So there was a part of that. And a part of it, I think, because I went to quite a few. I did 2 phases in AA, and a lot of what I saw in AA was people looking for answers. Why can't I stop? Why, when I have one, or why can other people have 1 or 2 and I can't? What's happened to me? All these questions, and it was always like, you can't rationalize addiction. Don't try and rationalize addiction. I thought, of course you can rationalize addiction. There's an answer to this. You just need to cut through the nonsense and see the lines of causation and understand it. So it was partly kind of setting the record straight, partly because I thought it would help people. And I think then when but those 2 things alone, that is enough to sit down, open a laptop and start writing. Okay, that is not enough to make you write a book. The actual reason when I started it, that I saw it through and finished it, is because when I started writing it, I really enjoyed writing. And I genuinely think I would have written it even if it had never gone anywhere, because I enjoyed doing it and I found it hugely beneficial, because I thought I had a good idea of alcohol and how it affected people and everything. But it wasn't until I came to write it down that I realized there were gaps in my knowledge. They often say, if you want to know a subject, teach it, because you're kind of going in and people are asking questions and you really need to know it inside out, and it solidifies your understanding of it. But I would say, if you want to know a subject, write about it, because you're writing about it and it's all setting it out, it's clarifying it in your mind, and also just helping you really understand it, and also seeing gaps. There was a few, because I thought, as I say, I thought I had it all pretty straight, but when I went to write it out, I found that there were quite a few big gaps in my knowledge. Chapter 5, in Alcohol Explained, the original one, is something that only kind of came to me when I was writing the book, and that's how the relaxation and the intoxication run its course at different times. Because I kind of had in my mind that the alcohol wears off, it leaves this unpleasant feeling. But then I was like, well, why is it when I'm really, really drunk, I still desperately want another drink? And it was writing it that made me think, well, of course, there's that aspect of it. It runs its course at different times. So you can be absolutely hammered and still desperately want another drink because that unpleasant feeling is kicking in, even though you're massively intoxicated. So it was actually enjoying it and getting a lot out of writing it, which was what drove me on to finish it, because it's an awfully big job and quite disheartening sometimes. Anyway, I hope that was useful for everyone. Nice to see you all, and see you next week. Have a good weekend, everyone. Bye.